Sam, Abhinav, welcome back. Thank you so much. Let's start with something straightforward. What's the one thing about your fundraising journey that surprised even you?
Firstly, thanks for having us, Rohit. Again, pleasure to be on. And yeah, I think we mentioned in the last podcast, right, like about we talked about self-awareness of strengths and relative weaknesses that you have as a team or a group of founders. And I think I would say we don't necessarily have or had directly a lot of experience fundraising before this one, but I think we were both obviously Abhinav's BC, ex-VC, so has seen it from the other side. And I've kind of been surrounded by people who started up at Dale and IIT Delhi. So kind of learned a lot of the basics and we felt we should have a lot of the tools to do this well. So I think that said, what surprised us the most was, uh, we ended up raising the whole round within roughly 4 weeks or so. We ended up getting around actually 27 different human beings to invest in it, though on much dear on the cap table because a bunch of them were rolled up into an AngelList RUV. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Uh, so, at that point, pickleball wasn't what it is today. As you mentioned, sport, offline, etc., aren't necessarily the areas where you see the most amount of funding. So I think we were pleasantly surprised by the pace, conviction, and just sheer number of people who were willing to put us at that point when it was essentially Abhinav and I and just 6 slides. So the fact that we got through it in around 4 weeks gave us a lot of confidence. But definitely we were probably geared in to do, a few months more of it if it came to that.
If you had to summarize your fundraising strategy in one line, what would it be, Sam?
I think I may have used this last time as well. It's a general philosophy that I think works so well with the fundraise, which is, if you got 6 hours to chop a tree, sharpen the axe for the first 5 hours. And I think that's kind of what we did with the fundraise. In fact, in this very room, Abhinav and I think we planned this shit out of it. To be honest, we had a huge whiteboard. Day one, I remember we're doing this. This is how much we're trying to raise. We literally categorized, we came up with these archetypes of investors, big name VC, small VC, early stage VC. Uh, I mean, we had something around like big dog angel. So angel who has pulling power in the market themselves versus other friends and family angels and so on. We created a list. I think our list crossed 150, mostly through warm leads and other people who we knew were interested in sport. And we locked ourselves in a WeWork for around 6 days straight and did only one thing, made our pitch deck, refined our story. It was a 6-page pitch deck, which I think still to this day, Abhinav or I can just recite in our sleep. It covered everything we wanted to. And I think after that, it was just executing, right? We had this 6-page, a slightly longer form deck as well as backup. Um, and we just went all guns blazing, reaching out to these 150 people. So I think the prep work that we put in, we resisted the temptation to go and start speaking to people just because they were willing to speak to us. We wanted to speak to them when we were prepared. Then eventually really helped us. So yeah, if you got 6 hours, don't just go chopping the tree straight up, sharpen the axe for the first side. Then all it should take is one blow.
For the audience, why pickleball? What made you believe that the space was worth building in?
Most people hadn't heard about it. And I would say, if I were to take it to the extreme, most people thought both of us were a little crazy. Um, that was the first reaction. But, for us, it really started, if you think about it, with sport, right? Given our own backgrounds. The fact that both of us have seen sport across multiple geographies, the UK, in India, tier one in India, tier two in India. So I think for us, basically, sport was something that it almost always annoyed us, the fact that in India, participation was so low. So the main mission for us was, hey, let's get more people playing, right? And I think while there were many ways to bell the cat here, the honest answer is that you needed spaces which are equally welcoming to attract an audience which was broader than the audience that was playing at that time. And we did the classic startup strategy of, testing 3 to 4 ideas very quickly. We were out there in the fields, testing out some video recording solutions, for example. So trying out all tech solutions. We were out there playing every new sport. We in fact played pickleball We played a tournament. Sam played in Rajkot. So it was interesting to discover courts all across the country. And what we discovered was that pickleball actually was the best vehicle for this mission. And given we were fairly early then, I think, now it's literally everywhere. But back then in Bangalore, we could count on our fingers the number of courts, and probably none of them would be courts you and I would even go to today, right? So we had the ability to create, with that first mover advantage, a unique brand within the sport, right? So that, plus the fact that the sport in itself was, of course, super social, super inclusive, super easy to start. We called GoRally because literally you can go rally within 30 minutes, right? So those were some of the reasons. I think hindsight's a great thing. I think this bet was made with a lot of sort of data, but even then could have flipped in either direction. But I think the fact that the market has been so strongly sort of supportive of this, and the growth over the last year has been amazing, has obviously benefited us to a great extent.
Let's actually jump into the mechanics of the fundraise. Could you walk through the entire thought process? You spoke a little bit about it in terms of creating a board of like 120 investors, categorizing them, but would love to understand the thought process you went in for the raise.
Like, I think the order of what you decide on the fundraise is quite important. I think the most organic place to start is, well, why are you raising, which Abhinav touched a little bit upon. How much are you raising, and what are you really trying to achieve with those funds in the first year? So I think we kind of sat down and said, okay, what could this first year look like? It probably looked like a couple of tech-enabled centers of a certain size, of a certain quality that we wanted to raise for. We then, I think, married it with the longer term kind of ambition we had in terms of what are we trying to achieve here. So it's a mission around sport. It is going to require, to a degree, behavior change. You're not playing in a huge tab that exists already. You kind of gonna have to do category creation. So we want a certain kind of capital, right? And I think that's where some of the most important stuff comes in terms of, are you raising, who are you trying to raise from? Because there's a lot of, there's a lot of capital out there, or different kinds of capital, I think. And whilst you may have access to all of them, or some of them, you have to think really deeply about what is the promise you're trying to make to those people, right? Are they passionate about the space? Is that why they invest in? Are they actually looking for certain kind of returns? If they're a VC in a certain time period? So I think we married the fact that, hey, we want to raise X, and that X probably looks like, it's that classic hypothesis-led approach of, it probably looks like one investor, coming up with this much, and a couple of the family and friends we knew who would support us coming up with this much, and a few others, finishing it off, and then marrying it with, hey, our ideal investor persona, just like we think of customer personas, perhaps think of them as investor personas. You have to imagine not just getting the money from them, but what life's going to be like after 6 months, and after 2 years, and after 5 years. And I think that's where the board came in, right? So we said, okay, let's put a laundry list of all the people we know who we can speak to. Let's categorize them, and then let's have some sort of prioritization process in terms of, who do we reach out to first? Who do we reach out to later? Who might follow some other folks versus who might actually be the first one to put their hands up and support us, right? So I think it sounds, I think first principles, maybe it sounds pretty straightforward, but I think as with all these things, it's in the execution, right? So yeah, that's where we started. We wrote a number on that board. We said, this is how much we're going to raise. By the way, we also did some, it's very hard to do on day one, especially when you don't have a business. We also did dilution math. We said, what would the next round look like, and the next round look like, revenue multiples, and so on. And of course, it's like building a business model, right? It never plays out the way you actually envision it, but it's a very useful exercise to go through, because I think you start to build these scenarios in your mind. You start to make the choices around how much and whom to raise from.
Yeah, totally. And I highly recommend every entrepreneur actually ends up doing that and going through that entire process, even if like things change, because like I said, right, some of the decisions you end up making really early on they sort of stick with you through the entire life of your business. Who your early investors are, sure, you can buy them out later, but how much of the company you've already given up. So let me ask you something else here, Sam. So could you talk about those different categories? And there's something that you said that really caught my attention in terms of, oh, this was how we were going to prioritize between them, right? And talk to me about what those different categories were.
We had like maybe like 3-4 categories in our head. Like I think anyone would be like, okay, there's angels, let's call them founder angels. There are these syndicate networks. There are obviously VCs. There's the big name, VCs, your Accels and Nexuses of the world, and there's your early stage VCs who will do seed capital and so on. So those were the natural starting points. But I think as we wrote on the board, we started to realize, okay, your founder angels, for example, there are 2 or 3 types, right? So for example, there are founder angels who just, they have a huge name in the market. So let's say a Kunal Shah type, right? There's, kind of is a founder angel, but having him on your cap table carries a certain weight and pull some other people in. Then there are founder angels who have the big name, but also we know from intelligence are passionate or have already invested in your space. So founder angels who are actually passionate about fitness, sport, etc. In our case, one of them ended up being ultra human, for example, who are in the space themselves, right? So the ultra human founders themselves do a lot of angel investments. Of course, they're in the fitness space. So what a great fit, and what a great calling card to say, hey, ultra humans are not cap tables. Straight away, you get credibility. And I would say there's a very important third of both category. This applies both to friends and family and founder angels. People who you just know are kind of warm leads to you, and are going to give you, of course, credibility, but are going to trust you, right? You need those 1 or 2 early backers. And I'm not talking about the kind of, friends and family, typical 3-5 lakh checks, right? I'm talking about the 2-3 people who, everyone, will have them, usually will have someone like that in their network, could be based abroad as well, who are going to put a 25-30 lakh check, right? And I think what we ended up doing was really like extracting that out from the list and saying, okay, these guys, we're going to go in first because they know us personally. And if they come in and they can commit, my, conversations with the other people become much easier because I can already go and say, hey, I had 2 conversations as of 3 days ago and you already got 50L committed, right? So they are warm leads for us, but they have their own credibility in the market. So I think it's just the classic chicken and egg sometimes, right? You want the belief, the other investors want the belief. And if you can break that cycle very quickly, it's very important. So I think, within VCs have 2-3 categorizations. Within your founder angels have 2-3 categorizations around are you looking for their name, their understanding or passion for the space, how well they know you. And then of course you'll have a slightly longer list of kind of friends, family, that sort of thing. So you'll end up with, like, in our case, I think 8 categories.
What was the number that you had written on the board as how much you wanted to raise?
We actually, I think we wrote the equivalent of $400,000, 3 crores, give or take. Eventually, of course, we ended up raising roughly double of that, which, like I said, was part of the pleasant surprise. In the sense that we obviously we had back calculated, like I said in the start, that is the minimum amount we need. The 3 crores is the minimum amount we need to execute what we think our vision for the first year will be, which in itself was to prove out the case for what we were trying to do, that, hey, there is this play to be had around community-led social sports spaces, which could lead to something bigger. Now, as we went through the round, and we started getting a few yeses, of course, with other kind of no's or I'll wait and watch as well. It wasn't like everyone was saying yes, but because we were going through so many, even a certain percentage of them saying yes added up to a lot of yeses pretty soon. We kind of realized midway that, hey, actually, we have the ability to go bigger, right? Very quickly. Maybe I would say a week and a half in, we realized that, yeah, 3 CR will not be a problem. So we kind of reassessed and said, okay, how much do we want to raise? And again, I keep, like, even conversations I've had since with other founders, you have to fix dilution, right? My golden principle, and only one round in, so we'll see how it plays around. But you got a fixed dilution or the rough idea of dilution upfront. Everything else can move, right? So you have a minimum number you want to raise. If you find you're in a good market and you're getting good value, you can increase that number, and thus your valuation or your terms will adjust as well. But you gotta, don't dilute yourself more just because you're getting more money. So I think we were very clear on that principle. And I think the other thing we were trying to do, going back to your categories of investors, was we were very clear that we didn't want big name VC yet. Like I said, sports, offline. And now whilst we have the kind of early embers of a kind of tech and D2C story, I think now some of them might be a better fit. But at that point, we were like, no point kind of getting into a partnership where, incentives aren't fully aligned yet. So we were very clear that we didn't necessarily want that, which means we wanted a really good mix of other angels, right? So eventually, if you look at our round, we've got a lot of the founder angels from India. We've got people from the US, someone who runs a hedge fund, someone who runs a startup of their own in the wine space. We've got a strategic, so someone who literally runs pickleball and paddle centers in Africa at distribution rights, some of the biggest brands there. We've got people who built in tech. We've got eventually technically a VC fund, Bharat Founders Fund, but really it's obviously a collection of founders themselves who are the LPs and really co-invest with the fund. So it's a very different model to your traditional VC. And then, of course, I would say, a bunch of friends and family, trusted friends from Bain, IIT, Abhinav's friends, and so on, right? So I think we were very clear of, if we're not going to do one big VC, we're going to distribute and try and get value from lots of different people in the ecosystem, and thus also distribute a little bit of the risk as well. There is a flip side to that, which maybe we can talk about later. But of course, you then want to balance the number of people you're getting on the cap table and eventually have to manage down the line. So I think, yeah, that's how we played it, but ended up raising 750. We had originally planned for 350 to $400,000.
So let's actually start with the fixing the dilution piece, right? How much were you willing to give up with the company in the beginning? And when you did your initial pitches, did you say, hey, we're looking to raise money, this much money, this valuation? Did you have to go back and change that? I'm assuming you guys did a CCD or something like that?
Yeah, so we did do a CCD, which is for those who may not know, it's a compulsorily convertible debentures. And perhaps we can talk about that as well. But essentially, it's an instrument where you don't have to fix exact valuation yet. You are essentially offering your first investor the ability to invest in your company for a discount in your future valuation when you raise your next rounds, with certain, floors and caps that protect both parties. Now, this is a really, and I really do want to expand on this, because I think it's a really interesting instrument that has emerged over the last few years. Of course, there's the safe note equivalent in the US as well. When we were doing the work, CCD, we were told, was kind of the equivalent in India. There's a couple of nuances. It's very similar to safe. But what I was surprised by, firstly, before I answer your question directly, is I had thought coming in that this would be information that's easily available, easily understood. There's so many rounds happening in India. There are people from VCs, there are legal firms, there are founders, there are investors. And yet, actually, we had to work pretty hard, even with all our network, to understand what the hell, how the hell a CCD works, what are the pros and cons versus, let's say, a price your classic traditional priced equity round, right? So, yes, we did raise on a CCD, and I think the biggest two values, and I highly recommend, if you're very early stage business, in fact, if you're like us, where you don't even have a business at all, at that point, we had just an idea, I think it's a great instrument, because what it does is two things. It doesn't force you into the whole valuation negotiation game, which is very hard to do when you don't have anything as a business. And B is honestly not a great use of your time, because you should be focusing very hard on what is it that you want to build and how you're going to build it and all that stuff. The other side benefit it has, which a lot of people don't understand, is because, so the way it works is the investor gives you the money. So let's say they give you the 6.5 CR in our case. It's initially treated as debt. So it's actually technically debt. So they just give us the cash and it will convert into equity in our next price down, as I said, at a discount. So for that first couple of years before you raised your, next seed round or series A or whatever it is, you actually have your investors, they've given you debt, which means they're not shareholders, which means there is no extensive shareholder agreement, to do at the start of the access. When you're starting the company, you're not like wrestling with a 100-page document or who gets what rights and this and that. And B, when you're actually then running the company, things like board meetings, certain decisions, etc., reserve matters are very limited, become much faster. If you are lugged with an SHA on day one, then guess what? A much larger chunk of your time is going to go to manage those investors. So, the way I remember one guy, he was speaking to one of the seed capital guys, and the way he explained it is, look, if you do a classic price down, the document you sign with the investors is going to be 100 pages long. If you do a CCD, it's going to be somewhere between 15 to 20 pages long, right? And in fact, if you were in the US and you did a safe note, it's going to be 5-6 pages long. So think really hard about, it's not just the fact that you don't have to negotiate valuation. It's also that your actual operations in the first couple of years when you're trying to figure out what product you're building get much easier. So that's why we chose CCD. I think we were well advised and I think we had done the homework. I remember we had these tables up, with like pros and cons of each and all of that. I think once you are in a CCD, it's also useful because, to your question, we weren't in the first conversation, and we'll talk about like the process. You send a pre-read 6-page deck. So usually what happened is we never actually like went through the slides on the call. People would have read it. They've got the deck on WhatsApp and they come with whatever questions they have, right? They all have very different questions, but we would leave the terms and the raise amount for the very end, right? It was the very last thing we would talk about. And often in many cases, we would just say, look, we're looking to raise 3 CR. Let us know if you're interested. It's going to be as a CCD. So it's going to have a discount to the next valuation and with a floor and a cap. And that's pretty much it, right? So what I found is a lot of people, again, one of the surprising things, didn't actually push us that much on valuation. At that point, they were just seeing space, passion, founders. And as long as we didn't have some crazy valuation, I think they were okay with it. And I think to that point, we kind of set out and said, look, yeah, we think we'll dilute between, depending on the future valuation, we'll end up diluting somewhere between 13 to 18, 19%, which I think was a very reasonable kind of take for most people. So that's how we went about it. And I think what we learned is do your kind of best to keep the investors focused on the kind of business conversation, have the valuation kind of thing later. And of course, the CCD construct anyways helps take the pressure of that further.
What was the floor and cap that you actually ended up setting? You were like, hey, 13 to 19%. You were like, when you realized how much you were going to raise, did you change the floor? Did you change the cap? How did that piece work?
Yeah. So I think the moment we increased our amount, right? We had a very interesting conversation with one of the investors who basically like, taught us or reminded us what I was telling you in the last question, which is, guys, look, you got to fix something, right? And I suggest the way you go about this is you fix your dilution. And as long as all of the other investors have the same terms, I think we will all be very okay to, come in and kind of come in at whatever the implied valuation is, given your raise. And I think his logic was this. He's like, if you said you set out to raise 3 and I said yes to be a part of that, then you came to me later and said, actually, I can raise 6 or 7. I see that as a great sign that you have a certain, your story is resonating. People are believing in you. You are actually able to execute well. And thus, I'm actually willing to adjust on the kind of valuation as well. But ultimately, the smart investors also know that just by taking a larger percentage of the company at the start, that's not the great, the best thing to do. They understand that they want to keep the founders incentivized. So he actually phrased it as, if you can go raise more in the market, great. Fix dilution, adjust your valuation accordingly. I'd be very okay with that. And this was one of the kind of major investors we got up front. Like I said, big name, founder angel. So it really helped from a credibility perspective.
You also spoke about using an AngelList RUV, right? Could you explain what that is, why you decide to use it, how you actually went about setting it up?
So RUV stands for roll up vehicle for those who may not know. It's we used AngelList. I think there's now a couple of platforms you can use in India. And like, I'll be honest, like with all due respect to the AngelList guys and others who are doing it, AngelList has done a great job, been in India for a while. It's still another one of those things that I thought sorely everyone understands this. And I think what we found was there was a lot of digging we had to do to understand the process, the implications, and so on. It's kind of like, think of ESOPs. Given the number of people who have ESOPs in this country, I am always like amazed by how few people actually understand the risks and how it works. So it's a little bit more obscure than an ESOP, but that's what we found. So the idea is it rolls up, as the name suggests, a bunch of investors into one single entity. And that's key because, like I said, if you look at our like investor list, we have 27 different either individuals or entities who have invested in GoRally, which is a great vote of confidence. Like 27 different people are saying, yeah, I would put money into what you're asking me to do. But having 27 of them on the cap table would probably or will probably be a nightmare for us. I mean, we're still very early days, 1.5 years in. So what you do is you take up a bunch of let's call them the long tail of investors. So classic would be your friends and family. Of course, I think India has this great culture now of like a lot of people will put a 3 lakh or 5 lakh check, partly because they want to support you, partly because they believe in you, and they kind of want a slice of the action. And there's another founder, gentleman called Abhinav Jain, who's a founder who's exited himself. I remember he told me, dude, like I put in 5 lakh checks for people who I know well, who I think are smart, because it gives me access to great founder conversations. So if I make money, great, but I actually do it because it gives me access to the best ideas and the best founders and the best friends and so on. So you take a bunch of those kind of folks who are putting in 3, 5, whatever. In our case, we drew the line at 10 lakhs. So if you are 10 lakhs or below, and I think we had around 13 or 14 of them, we said, okay, you're all going to be rolled up into a single entity. That's what AngelList does for you. So they collect the money from all those investors. They sign an agreement with those investors, and they become then this single vehicle that sits on your cap table, right? And then, of course, in the future, if there are matters that require a vote, like let's say a classic one would be an exit, AngelList would internally, obviously, kind of do the vote with all of their 14 shareholders and come up with a collective view, and then that would be the vote on your cap table, right? So what it does is, instead of 27, I have, let's say, 11 or 12 entities to manage directly on the cap table. And I think it's a really critical thing to think about. And in fact, I think maybe one of the things we could have gone even harder on, now that I think of it, maybe I would have rolled up a few more people if I in the roll up pickle. But at that point, we had felt anyone who was doing, because anyone who, like, there were a lot of people who were doing 15, 20, 25 lakh, and we felt that was a sizable amount of money for them to have a seat at the cap table. With hindsight, maybe we could have pushed that barrier a little bit more. But yeah, that's how RUB works. And I would highly recommend it to people who are looking at a large collection or a very fragmented investor base as an instrument.
Did investors care that they were entering this RUV or anything like that, or it didn't really matter?
Some did. I think especially your founders themselves, or like your, almost like institutional angel investors, they understand the game. They did, but I think equally when you explain, they understood. I think what I found is, barring maybe one or two where we had to push maybe a little bit, I think generally investors understood that for each company, there is a rank order of who is taking, the lead or the risk, right? So they understood that if they were putting in 5, 10 lakhs, and there were multiple people putting in 25, 50, more than 1 CR, then in this particular company's instance, it was okay for them to take a back seat and just be part of it. So I think there was, I would say again, I don't know, by luck or maybe that's how it is, high degree of maturity around this topic.
All right, last question. These investors, how many of them did you know personally and how many of them did you get introduced to? Like, how do you get in touch with these people? Because you also spoke about, hey, a strategic investor in Africa who set up pickleball courts. That's awesome, right? It's almost like getting a insight into what your future could look like. So curious to know about that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers top of my head. I would say, I think the split would be 25% we knew personally, uh, 50% we got introduced to a warm lead. So that is your, I think, meat of the whole thing. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then 25% kind of happened by chance. You know, one person leads you to another, like this, the person you just mentioned, the Africa strategic investor, was in that category. And all of them are important, right? Because when you design your fundraise, like I said earlier, you have to have your first 25% of bankers, people who who have the cash, who are going to say yes, going to get you off to a great start. So that's like, just have that in place. Could be big, small amounts, doesn't really matter. And then I think the part that you really want to plan and execute for is the middle 50%. And here it's almost, I think what's the most important thing is that note that your friend or your colleague or whoever through whom which you're reaching out to these people is going to send, right? So if I'm reaching out to Rohit to get me an introduction to Abhinav, the investor, of course, lot matters on like how I, deliver in front of Abhinav in the meeting or in the call or whatever. But I think that note that Rohit sends to Abhinav is so critical, right? Because it can't be seen as one of those spray and pray. Rohit got a message. He's like, whatever, let me just forward it and get this off my, to-do list. It has to have that warmth, that personal kind of, attachment to it, where you maybe add a couple of lines and you add something very, very, very unique to that particular investor you're reaching out to. Because I think at this stage of the company, there's no business again, there's no numbers. So what really, if those guys are interested in the space, they like the founder's credentials, then it just becomes a matter of, is this a recommended person? Is this a person I can trust? And that's all. If they don't, they're not interested in the space, you're anyways not going to get them. If they're not impressed by your credentials or your background, you're anyways not going to get, right? So it's really, you have to focus on that. I think work with your network on how you're going to reach out to these warm leads. And then the last 25% just, will happen by chance. Some investor will be like, great, I'm putting in this. I'd love for you to speak with this person. Have you spoken to that person? So I reiterate, and I know this is common knowledge, I think, as they say, right? Especially when you're doing the bigger rounds, it only takes one investor to say yes, right? You can go to 50 and get 49 no's, but you just need one yes. So it's a numbers game. All of those guys who you didn't know before will automatically come through that.
Let's talk about the storytelling side now. What was the dream you sold these investors? What was that sort of core story, that unique insight that you had, which got these investors excited?
The first thing I'll say is understand what the end user here is looking for, and important to categorize that at a company that early, especially when you're going to seasoned angel investors, they know that at that point they're backing a team. 90% of what they're backing is a team, and I think they need to know that the market is somewhat exciting to them, right? It could be whether they're excited about the size of the market or they're passionate about the space in general. I think so. Understand that that's really what you're trying to get through your deck. The other thing is, I think, keep it simple, keep it short. So you're at that point of time not going to get plaudits for selling some $1 billion story, which there are 10 different steps to be doing to get to. So I think at that point, given where we were at, you're like, listen, here's our story. It's simple, and it's short. Make sure if we can get through at least 80% of what we're trying to tell you, we've done a good job. So I think that was the real litmus test of any deck that we were producing. And look, it looks easy because it's short, but it takes so many iterations. I think your first version to last version, you probably like keep editing. It's like proper sort of edit, re-edit, test, edit again. And only then, after you've done it a bunch of times, are you truly investor ready. So I remember, I think before we even did even any of our first pitches, right, we literally would speak the sort of deck out to each other, and I think keep reiterating, re-editing basis that. Even after then, we had a list of, let's say, easier investors to speak to. So let's say almost people who we were a little bit more comfortable speaking to, that we tested out the pitch with before we went to someone completely sort of unknown, right? So you need to know that, first impressions are everything. So how confident you are, how clear your story is, and how simple it is to understand is as important, if not more important, than probably even the story that you're saying.
Did you have a different pitch for different categories of investors? Because you knew like, hey, this is someone who's already invested in the sports space or the health space before. Or was it like, hey, the same standard pitch, this is what we're trying to do? How do you approach that?
So probably a good time for me to quickly share our deck as well.
That would be amazing.
Before I do that, like, no. So the answer is we didn't change the deck at all. And that is, part of why I think the deck was really good, right? It had that universal appeal that it would appeal to broadly everyone. But I think different investors, a little bit more nuance about them, right? So especially warm leads, someone will tell you, hey, this person's actually super passionate about sport. So we know that's the angle we need to play there. Or, hey, this person's actually going to be more worried about the numbers and wants to talk and spend a lot more time with you on the numbers, right? That that's what they're looking for. So if you get that additional color, helps you spend that time. But wait, let me just first quickly share. We were basically called Rally back then. We're GoRally now. A friend basically put together our first logo. But what I want to just quickly run through is the whole deck to just show you how short it was, right? So it's the team, it's our mission, it is the larger market, which is sport, and why it's truly an exciting time to build in sport, and our approach about how we're starting with pickleball, and wanting to build a true valued sporting brand in pickleball and then move into other sports as well. It's telling people about pickleball, because at that time, as it was more pickle what rather than literally the first sport on everyone's lips. So telling them about pickleball, and rather coyly also telling them why you know it's become such a great phenomenon in the US. It's picking up in India. And look, we've already tested this. So in fact, if you see that, the right hand side, basically it's us showing them how we'd actually done a couple of initial tests of the sport. We'd gotten a few folks from the association to test this out actually in Sam's gated community themselves. Then talk about what you're really building, right? So this, in our case, I guess, is the product slide, right? So our product was our concept, so tech-enabled centers, and our sort of GTM to actually go ahead and do that. And of course, the money slide, the numbers, right? So telling them about the unit economics of a typical center, telling them about what you plan to do in year one, which is you plan to perfect your first center, be super lean, and try to be P&L profitable from year two onwards already, right? And proud to say that we've kind of more than achieved at least the figures that we've went and set out here. And that's also equally important, right? Don't oversell something. Be very confident that you're able to deliver, because I think the confidence that you can give your investors from here on is super important. You'll also see we've had our raise amount at the bottom. So it was very much 3 crores when we went out to raise initially. But hope that gives you a little bit of color as to what we were trying to sort of achieve. Must be said, we had a longer version of this deck as well. But the typical sort of format was we'd send this deck out with a short note, and this would almost be a pre-read for most investors. And yeah, Sam said, like, it got to the point where you woke us up at any point of the night, we wake up and we'd shoot.
No, I think the funny thing was, so we didn't stop a lot of the first slide, which is like, our profiles. We heard each other do that so many times. We used to joke like, Abhinav, I can just do your introduction word for word. I can I know what you're gonna say, right? So that was really like, we had a couple of funny moments with that. I want to add a couple of other tactics around this. Abhinav mentioned like the long form deck, which is really important. Yeah, this is the kind of founder slide. Couple of things I would say, right? Like, look, again, be self-aware. I'll be completely honest. We knew we had to put this slide first because we are actually kind of experienced professionals, right? Like, we're not 24-year-olds who are like starting something. So yes, we'll sell the dream, but first we want to say, look, you got an 18 you're dealing with here. So please, have this meeting with that due kind of understanding. That was to set the stall out straight up. I think the other thing was we used to send the 6-page thing as a PD on WhatsApp. And then if someone, I think only 20% of people requested the long form deck, which we would share after. It's so important to make it easy for people to digest. I remember, we looked around at, those platforms where you got to sign in with your email, and then, only then you get access to the deck, and you can, then sharing it with others becomes a little bit harder. So if you don't have, because we didn't have a business, so we didn't necessarily have, financial data to share yet. So if you don't have something super secretive, you're early stage, make it easy for your investors. Let them forward the WhatsApp. Don't get into that. Oh, I'm not going to, of course, we're building a product in stealth. Then of course you got to protect it. But in our case, that wasn't the thing. And I think that's how we got a lot of those other 25% leads who people would just forward the deck and other people would be interested in speak.
What was like the big objection or pushback, and how do you sort of handle that?
So very similar to what your initial probable question would have been as well, right? What's your moat? Everyone hears the entire deck, they're convinced on market, they're convinced on founder, but they're like, okay, if you do this, then what, right? What you now discovered is that even on the center's business, what happens is that uh, truly your network, which is the community of people that are actually playing at your center, are your moat. Rohit, if you do play pickleball, I'm sure you've noticed that you really care about the kind of people you're playing with. So it's probably like that next 5 to 10 people that you're playing pickleball with, that immediate circle of yours. So if I can make sure that that immediate circle always keeps coming back to GoRally, and there are multiple ways for me to do that, both, I guess, digitally and physically. If I can make sure that that's happening, that tie-in is so strong. And that's what kind of slowly builds that model. And we've done a lot of work. I think we're still the early days there. I think we'll be doing a lot more. But, knock on wood, we have about 7,000 people now in our WhatsApp community across Bangalore, but due to strategic decisions that we made over a period of time, right? And that acts as a snowball to drive the effect. And then whenever the 7,001st person comes in, right, very likely that they pick GoRally over X other players in the market.
Yeah, there are a bunch of other quotes, but tell me about how much attraction matter, because you guys organize that pickleball tournament and so on. Did that like help? Did that suddenly get people being like, get convinced that, oh, there is a market or these guys can execute?
So I think important to walk back to timelines here, right? So we incorporated the company in February, and we started to raise around in March, right? In April, we conducted our first large tournament, the Bangalore Open. So somewhere between Jan to March, we also did a bunch of these tests. Let's just call them like small clinics that we used to do, small workshops to show people. And it was more for us, to be honest, right? Rather than for an investor, for us to truly see that this idea had validation. And I think a lot of what we saw, a lot of the fact that families were extremely engaged in pickleball, despite it being completely new sport. People, as soon as they got on court, would and by the way, these were rudimentary setups, right? We literally taken a basketball court and put a net on top of it, put some tape on the court as well. People were still having a ball. It was tough to get them off the court. Like, we started early in the morning at 7 a.m. till 5 p.m. people were playing, right? These are all strong signs for us. But if I were to classify traction, not really, right? I think It wasn't that people were saying, look, this has your idea or your setup has already got X different users, and hence I am ready to back GoRally. I think it today definitely will play a part if I go raise a round today. But at that point, very honestly, for our pre-seed round, it wasn't very much an important sort of piece.
Did you guys try to create any kind of FOMO at all? Or since it was a CCD, it didn't really matter almost?
Very honestly, like, no. I mean, we didn't actually actively try to create it. I think what happened after a point was that, we closed our round fairly quickly, right? So right after we closed, there were a lot of people who were still sort of interested in investing, and unfortunately we couldn't include in that round. But we again, the classic saying, right? Many a slip before a cup hits the lip, right? So we made sure that we kept all these people warm and interested still, right? So we weren't like, we're not going to take your money. Kept them warm and interested just in the case that, there were 1 out of 10 of the investors that had committed that fell through. We'll always make sure we had a wait list of people still waiting. So yeah, I don't think we actively went to create FOMO. I think from being on the other side, I do know that it works particularly well, especially when you're going to raise venture funding. But at least happy to say that didn't feel that same pressure on the angel side.
But that's still interesting though. You were like, hey, you've gotten the people on board, and when more people came in, you're like, hey, the round is closed, but we'll keep you on the list. If anyone drops off, we'll add you to it. That's actually an interesting way to handle like overflow.
We fixed dilution. So to a certain point, we're like, when we're going above a certain number, a certain percentage, we probably want to make sure that we're not going beyond it. So that's how we sort of set it.
I speak to a lot of founders, like really good product folks, really good at sales, good clarity of thought, right? They speak to investors, angel investors, different sizes, scale, and there's initially a lot of interest. And then the investors ghost them, or they themselves sort of get into this world of like, oh, this person's agreed to put in money. And then they go around searching for the other people. And eventually the round never closes, right? How do you avoid that trap?
I think you need to keep things moving, right? So from your perspective, there are certain conversations you have where it's literally like you're basically there, right? So immediately after the conversation, follow up and make sure it's on email, make sure the commitment is there, give them a day or two to think, but no further. If you don't get a response beyond that, I would assume that you probably need to move on, right? So you kind of make sure everything's on paper. Once you get to a number, don't dilly-dally, meaning once someone's said yes, once you've accepted it, yeah, keep your word. I think that's what builds trust in the market. This is a fairly small market. Word spreads quickly. So don't dilly-dally once you made a commitment. Kind of, if you're not ready to make the commitment, say that upfront as well. But if once you made a commitment to an investor that you're including them in the round, it's really like your word. So that's it. I think what a lot of people find is, I think they're waiting for that one magic bullet, right? Almost like the one investor who they really really want in that cap table, and they kind of like holding everyone hostage till they get there. I think we didn't tend to do that at this stage, right? I think that's super important for us. I think um, there was a certain set of key requirements that needed to be fulfilled, and as long as you tick those boxes and you were ready to put money at the terms we were offering, you were in. So it wasn't much more like, we really really want a particular investor, we're willing to probably change the terms for this investor. Even we had a couple of really big names, honestly, who went and said that, I'm willing to put money if you are willing to lower your valuation. I said, sorry, we already have significant commitment at this particular valuation. We can't change terms for this. So those are certain principles which, if you abide by, you'll make sure you keep things moving. And also, ultimately you have to run a business, right? So this fundraise cannot go on forever. So keep timelines, stick to them. That's how you need to go about it. But equally, like, understand that from the day you get your commitment to the day the money hits the bank, there's another couple of months, right? A lot of paperwork. So account for all of that when you're sort of keeping your fundraise timelines.
Yeah, how do you actually do that? Maybe Sam, you can actually answer this. So an investors come in, they're excited, hey, I'm willing to put in 20 lakhs, 10 lakhs, whatever that number may be. It takes a while for them to actually, for the round to officially close and for them to wire that their money in, right? A lot can change in that time. So what do you do to make sure that doesn't end up happening?
Like you said, first design, I would say design assuming for whatever reason, one or two will drop. And in fact, in our case, one person couldn't wire the money because it's an international investor and there was some banking issue. And eventually did wire it like later. Um, we ended up extending the same round for them like 2 months down the line. But uh, assume that you will have one or two. If you're getting 10 investors, assume one will drop off for whatever reason. That's like one. Two is, as Abhinav said, the moment you have an understanding or a yes, uh, formalize it on email. Um, Obviously, some people will do stuff like firm sheet, but again, we felt early stage business. Really, this was about like trust and backing the founders and so on. So we just mostly did this on email. And then I think till that, third is obviously keep it moving then, right? So if you are able to do your fundraise within, I would say 4 to 8 weeks, i.e. the conversations and get the yeses and the nos, then uh very quickly get into execution. But during that 4 to 8 weeks, do try and keep your investors warm, and you will know which ones you need to keep warm, right? Like your friends and family, you don't need to, they anyways trust you. Your biggest investor or your strategic investors will obviously be interested in what's going on. What I think what we found is most of these people are also themselves very busy. They're doing a lot of these and so on. So it doesn't need to be war and peace. You just need to drop them a note once in a while, a week after, saying, hey, just FYI, it's going well. We've been able to raise now 2 out of the 3. We should be able to close it in the next couple of weeks, right? So give them comfort, keep it warm, and then keep them, have that. Like a lot of them would actually ask us, when do you think wiring's going to happen? Because it turns out a lot of them have to move money around. They probably have invested it somewhere. And so, you know, kind of stick to that timeline, give them that visibility. There's always going to be plus minus 1 2 weeks here and there. But as long as there's communication, I think you can to see that most of them will stick with you. Or if for whatever reason they're getting cold feet or whatever, because there is constant communication, you will figure that out much early, right? You won't figure it out at the time. Why? So that's kind of what we did.
Is there a way to actually get money from the people the moment they commit? Is that even possible to structure into a round? It's just like, oh, this person's interested. It's a rolling round. Just put it in here right now.
That's probably a great startup idea right there, Rohit. I think, not do that. No, we did not use or explore that. I don't know if that exists, but of course, like in other, I guess in other facets of business, you have escrow accounts, things like that, right? But I think at this stage, to be honest, uh, the power dynamic is such that the angel will not take any risk, right? Like, why would they? So they probably give you their word, you formalize it over email, and then they expect that you will come back with the relevant documentation. They will give whether even if the CCD doc 15 pages, they will read it. They'll come back to you with questions, and then they will sign it, right? So, like Abhinav said, that's why it does take somewhere between 1 to 2 months. And in our case, we had foreign investors, so it does take 2 months because you have RBI filings and whatnot as well too. So be cognizant. You're raising from foreign investors, it means more paperwork. Have an extremely strong CS and legal team. This is one of those classic uh, penny wise, pound foolish kind of things. Do not try and get the cheapest kind of person you find or agency you find, because having a strong partner there really helps. So I think, yeah, I would love if a mechanism like that existed. We didn't find it yet.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was thinking about escrows for this as well, right? Because usually when people say yes, that's when they're most excited about it. Then they've heard 15 other pitches by the time it comes to wiring the money. So, yeah, interesting. Surprised it doesn't, but let's see. Cool. Last few questions, guys. So, what advice would you give someone trying to raise 500K to $1 million?
Yeah, I think first fix dilution. And once you've fixed dilution, understand who's probably the best fit from an investor archetype for your round. So if it's angels, then it's a very different approach than if it's, say, a venture-backed company and a venture capital fund that you're looking at. So yeah, fix your dilution, know your investor, and yes, I think we're coming back. Spend probably like a good 4 weeks just sharpening your story, your deck, till you're absolutely ready to go out there, because first impressions matter.
Let's actually jump into the rapid fire side. So, first question to you, Sam. One investor meeting you'll never forget.
There are so many interesting ones. Firstly, like one little, what we found was I think we did half of fundraise out of one single blue tokai here in RMZ cohort. So that kind of became one little hotspot. But it isn't that very blue tokai. We met one of our, I would say, biggest investors, one of our top 7, top 8. He's a founder angel. And he had obviously already read the deck. We had shared it over WhatsApp. So we turn up to the meeting. We're meeting him for the first time. So classic, introduced via wrong lead, but don't personally know him. And very, very kind of calm, sedate kind of guy. And he just sits us down and he's like, look, guys, I read the deck. You guys are awesome. It looks like a really interesting thing you do. I, by the way, myself, do not play any sport. I know nothing about sport, but I love the mission. I have only one question of you guys. And so we both of the like, what's coming? This could be anything. And he was just basically, he said this in Hindi. He's like, तुम लोग ये 10 साल तक करोगे ना? Like, will you actually stay the course? He said, everything else I can see. I can see the mission. I can see the space. I can see why you're a good fit. But, and I think this is, one of one of the least talked about things for founders, but one of the most important, because ultimately all great startups, as you will know as well, Rohit, are about resilience. Can you stay the game for 5, 10, 15 years? And then if you're smart enough, passionate enough, you usually find some sort of outcome, impact, big, small, is a different matter. So he basically was like, look, you guys have peers who are in VC and consulting and all these other professionals. I know you'll start with this great energy, but 2 years later, when they're all getting whatever promoted or big jobs and you're still building this thing out, will you guys do it? Right. So I think in the first instant, it took us a little bit by surprise, because this was one of the first conversations we were having. But I still remember it as probably the best question anyone asked throughout the whole thing. Right. He was like, yeah, the what and the how you'll figure it out. It's about the why. Are you going to be able to wake up every day for the next 10 years and do it? So yeah, that's quite memorable, at least for me.
All right. Next questions to Abhinav. Worst pitch you've ever given?
I feel like the worst pitches are ones where like you literally from the start of the conversation feel like there is a wavelength mismatch. So it could be in many ways. It could be in the way that what's priority for the person on the other side of the conversation. So typically what happens is when we're talking very deeply about our passion for sport, our mission, and we hear someone just straight cut into what's your utilization, what's your court utilization, what are your numbers, immediately we're like, yeah, okay, mute each other and we're like, yeah, this conversation's going downhill. So I think that those are the weird ones, right? Because sometimes I think it also comes from a perspective that there is a notion in the market that especially on the venture side, I've been on the other side, right? There is a notion in the market that everyone's out there looking to get funded, but that's not always true, right? I think people and founders today are equally, it's equally important for founders to feel like there is a connect between who they're getting money from and their own idea and story. So yeah, I think a lot of people just forget that and just like straight get to business. So I do feel like it is important to feel that connection, especially in these conversations.
Cool, guys. Thank you so much. This was fantastic. I learned a bunch. And I'm sure like this is one of those episodes I can totally see a lot of people watching because they're like, how do we end up raising this round? So yeah, thank you so much for your time, guys. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. Great chat as always.